The air was thick with the scent of dust and iron as the train screeched to a halt at the station in Dry Creek, Colorado. Eleanor Gray, her gloved hands trembling around the edges of a worn leather satchel, descended onto the sun-baked earth. The wind playfully teased the hem of her traveling coat, revealing boots that seemed too polished for this rugged terrain. With a hesitant step, she emerged into the harsh light, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her rib cage like a bird trapped in a cage. In her pocket nestled a letter 4 pages long, each fold precise, sealed with a smudge of wax. She had pored over it so often that every word was etched into her memory. George Penner, rancher widower, a man of means and a gentle soul, had penned his proposal with a confident hand. He offered not merely marriage but a purposed companionship, a sanctuary beneath the vast open skies. For Ellie, who had grown accustomed to being a mere shadow in Boston's drawing rooms, whispered about in curt tones, this letter felt like a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea. She scanned the platform where men in dust-covered hats lingered, their faces weathered by time and toil, and a woman with a basket of vibrant prairie roses called out names for deliveries. Standing taller, she envisioned George tall, with skin darkened by the sun, hands toughened by labor. In her mind's eye, he always tipped his hat with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Miss Gray." The voice startled her, coming from her left. Turning, she saw a man approaching. He was tall indeed, and his boots spoke of success. Yet his expression, like a sudden cloud over a clear sky, stopped her heart cold. "Yes," she replied, her voice a mixture of hope and apprehension as she drew herself up, battling the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Ellie," he hesitated, his mouth tightening as his gaze traveled from the top of her hat to her polished boots, assessing questioning. His eyes lingered on her tiny shoes, pausing a beat too long on her diminutive stature. She was barely 5 feet tall. He didn't smile. "You didn't mention in your letters that you were so myo." He stopped, the unspoken word hovering like a wisp of smoke. Ellie's cheeks flushed crimson. "So," she prompted, her voice quivering with an undercurrent of defiance. He glanced around, perhaps hoping they were not observed. "Small," he finally admitted, as if each syllable pained him. Her heart squeezed, the atmosphere growing thick and heavy. "I didn't realize that was a disqualifier," she retorted, her voice laced with both hurt and pride. "Besides, I was looking for someone to help manage a ranch. It's rough out here," he continued, his tone apologetic yet firm. "You look like you'd be blown away in a storm." His words cut deeper than they should have, settling like a stone behind her ribs. That all too familiar feeling of shrinking began to envelop her. Still, she raised her chin, her eyes locking onto his with a fierce determination. "You wrote about needing a partner, not a hired hand. I wrote about needing someone who could carry their own weight. And you assumed I couldn't." George's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of regret passing through his eyes. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, then looked at her as if she were a well-meaning mistake. "I assumed wrong," he conceded, his voice low. "I'll have a ticket arranged for you back east. I'll cover your train fare." She laughed, though the sound was brittle, sharp with irony. "Is that supposed to be generous?" she asked, her voice steadying. "It's meant to be kind," he replied, his expression earnest yet inadequate. "No," she said, her voice firm now. "Kindness would have been meeting me with a smile even if you'd changed your mind. Kindness would have been giving me 5 minutes of your time after I crossed the entire country to be here." A sudden breeze caught the brim of her hat, sending it tumbling across the platform like a wayward leaf. She reached for it, but it slipped away, and no one, not even George, moved to help. He stepped back, his face a mask of regret. "I'm sorry, Miss Gray." Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a drum roll to the unraveling of her life. She stood motionless as the town's pulse continued, indifferent to her plight. Eyes, some filled with pity, others barely masking their amusement, flicked her way. A mail-order bride discarded like a faulty product, she felt the sting of rejection cut deep. The man leaning against the weathered porch post observed her silently. His presence was a quiet force compelling her to look. His hat was battered, his coat worn at the elbows, and his face told tales of sun and wind. His eyes, a stormy gray, locked onto hers, unreadable, yet somehow inviting. As George vanished around the bend, this stranger descended the porch steps with a deliberate slowness, as if every movement was a choice made with care. "You all right?" His voice broke the heavy silence. Ellie turned fully towards him, her voice sharp with defiance. "Do I look all right?" "No," he admitted, his gaze unwavering. "You look like someone who's been dealt a cruel hand and is fighting to keep from crumbling right here on this dusty street." Her eyes blinked in surprise. "You're not a stranger anymore, not after this," he said, his tone gentle yet firm. "Name's Rhett Callahan." Arms crossed, Ellie challenged him. "Do you always offer unsolicited sympathy, Mr. Callahan?" He shrugged, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Only when it looks like the person might have a good retort." Despite the turmoil within, her lips twitched, betraying a hint of amusement. "I'm not looking for a conversation." "Are you looking for a job, then?" His question caught her off guard. Ellie's eyes narrowed, skepticism etched in her expression. "A job? You think I'm just going to turn around and go back on that train?" "No," she answered quickly, her voice gaining strength. "No, I'm not." He nodded as if he had anticipated her response. "Then you'll need somewhere to go, something to do. I've got a ranch. It's nothing fancy, but the work's honest, and I respect grit." She paused, her gaze searching his face for any sign of deceit or mockery. Why was he a man with the weathered look of a seasoned cowboy extending a lifeline to her in her moment of despair? His offer hung in the air, a beacon of hope amidst the wreckage of her dreams. The train had come and gone, leaving behind a trail of dust and the echo of its whistle. I've seen people disembark from that iron horse, their eyes wide with wonder or fear, their hands empty of any real purpose. But you've got a spark in your spine, a resilience that whispers of your readiness to stand firm even when no one's watching. I respect that, truly, I do. Ellie paused, her gaze narrowing as she studied the stranger before her. Was he spinning tales? Could he be a threat? Yet there was something in his voice that wasn't manipulative but genuine, like an offering rather than a lure. After the day she had, she was tired of letting others dictate her value. "I don't know the first thing about ranching," she admitted, her voice a mix of defiance and uncertainty. "Good," Red responded with a grin that seemed to stretch the very fabric of the moment. "Means you'll learn my way." She tilted her head, considering his words. "And if I say no, then I tip my hat and wish you luck," he said, his tone sincere. "But Ellie, you've got fire in your soul. You just need a place to let it blaze." Her gaze drifted to the vanishing point of the tracks, then down to the dust on her boots, and finally to Rhett Callahan, who had spoken more truth in 5 minutes than George Penner had in a month of letters. "Fine," she said, her voice steady despite the tumult inside. "But I'm no damsel in distress waiting for rescue." "Didn't think you were," he replied, turning away. "Let's go. We've got a long ride ahead." With her satchel bouncing against her hip and her pride slightly dented but intact, Ellie followed him. The town faded into the horizon, a hawk's cry piercing the silence, a call to something grander, something beyond. Ellie didn't look back. She was through with being someone's disappointment. Now she was stepping into her own legend. The journey to Rhett Callahan's ranch was long under a sky that seemed to stretch into eternity. Silence hung heavy between the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves and the whispering sway of the prairie grass. Ellie sat upright, her back stiff in the saddle Rhett had offered without pomp, her hands gripping the reins with the awkwardness of the untrained, her thighs protesting with each stride. She glanced. Ellie couldn't help but steal glances at Rhett as they rode through the sprawling, sun-baked expanse. His posture was relaxed, his gaze unwavering and forward, as if he had witnessed every corner of the world and found it all too ordinary. The landscape stretched out before them, a vast canvas, painted in burnt gold and ochre hues adorned with sparse, defiant bushes and the fleeting silhouette of a deer on the horizon. There was no respite from the elements here, only the relentless wind swirling dust and a deceptive sense of boundless liberty. Upon reaching their destination, the ranch appeared rather humble. A weathered two-room cabin with gray wood siding stood next to a barn that had seemed to lean ever so slightly eastward, as if tired from the weight of time. A paddock which might have known better days 2 seasons ago now housed a few cows lazily grazing near a dilapidated fence. A lone dog barked once from under the porch before slinking back into the shadows. "Is this it?" Ellie's voice was tinged with disbelief as she dismounted, her legs protesting with a sharp pain from the impact. "This is home," Rhett replied, securing his horse with a nonchalant air. "If you're expecting white picket fences and the sweet scent of lilacs, you've certainly boarded the wrong train." "I wasn't looking for that," she countered, dusting off her skirt. "I was searching for honest work." He looked at her, a gaze that lingered just long enough to measure her sincerity without uttering a word. Then with a casual flick, he tossed her a bucket. "Water's in the well. You'll need to fill the trough before sunset." Ellie barely caught at the bucket. Its weight was deceptive, crafted from thick wood and encircled by iron hoops. Without further ado, Rhett walked away, leaving her to absorb the stark reality of her situation. Here she was alone on a stranger's land, penniless, with no way back. Only her stubbornness and a sliver of pride kept her rooted to the spot. She began hauling water, her arms soon trembling with the effort. Half of it spilled, her curses were quieted by the wind, and her foot sank into the unforgiving earth. Yet amidst the struggle, a question echoed in her mind. Was this truly the beginning of her new life, or merely another chapter in a long, arduous journey? As Ellie stumbled into a patch of mud, the trough sloshed with a sound that echoed her own exhaustion. The cows, with their wide, unblinking eyes, watched her as if she were a peculiar creature from another world. By the time she had finished her chores, the sky had blushed into shades of lavender, and the barn stretched its long, dark shadows across the yard like a protective cloak. Red appeared then, his silhouette framed by the doorway, carrying 2 bowls of steaming stew. He handed one to her without a word, and they settled onto the porch steps, the silence between them not cold but somehow comforting. The old dog nestled between them, its presence a reminder of countless, uneventful evenings. "You always this talkative." Ellie broke the silence, her voice playful yet weary. "You always this nosy," Red shot back, with a smirk, his response catching her off guard and drawing a smile from her. "Only when I'm tired and sore and need someone to complain to," she confessed, her guard dropping slightly. "Well, I'm not much for complaining. The world's hard enough without people reminding it," he replied, his voice tinged with a weariness that spoke volumes. They fell into silence again, but it was a silence that felt rich with unspoken understanding. The light from the cabin's fire flickered through the windows, painting the yard in a golden glow. Somewhere beyond the hills, a coyote's howl pierced the night, stirring the cattle in their pens with a shiver of unease. The days that followed were relentless, each one sweeping past like the hot, restless wind. Ellie learned to ride not with grace, but with a determination that kept her in the saddle. She mucked stalls, carried feed, scrubbed tools, and chopped kindling until her hands were raw and blistered. Rhett, for his part, was a man of few words, his silence not of indifference, but of a quiet curiosity, watching to see if she would break. She didn't. At night they shared meals, and Ellie would regale him with tales of Boston, of her mother's embroidery shop, of the books that had filled her younger years. Rhett listened, his gaze steady, occasionally offering a dry jest that would send her into peals of unexpected laughter. In these fleeting moments, Ellie glimpsed the essence of Rhett, a man forged from sorrow and solitude, yet somehow still open to the world. Amidst the silence that clung to him like a protective shell, there were no photographs adorning his walls, no letters whispering secrets of his past. Yet one evening, as Ellie reached for a pot, her fingers brushed against something unexpected, a faded pink ribbon hidden behind the mundane crockery. She chose silence as her response. One crisp morning, Red handed her a rifle, his movements swift and sure. "It's time you learned," he said, his voice steady as he loaded the weapon with the ease of long practice. "Coyotes are getting bold. They won't always wait for me." Ellie accepted the rifle, her grip firm. "Point, shoot, don't flinch." "Pretty much," he instructed, "except don't miss." And she did not after the third attempt. The shot echoed through the hills, leaving her breathless. "Well," she asked, seeking his approval. "You're not terrible." He conceded, a hint of praise in his tone. "Don't let it go to your head." Later that week, she ventured to the creek for water. The trail slick from a recent storm demanded careful steps. Dismounting with her bucket, a rattlesnake lunged from under the rocks. Her heart pounded, the rattle vibrating through her very being. Then a shot shattered the tension. The snake's head recoiled, blood painting the earth. Rhett, his rifle still smoking, rode up. He dismounted, his concern palpable as he knelt beside her. "You all right?" She nodded, her voice a whisper. "You're late. You're welcome," he said, his fingers lingering on hers as he helped her up, neither eager to break the contact. That night by the fire, Ellie's curiosity could no longer be contained. She asked about the ribbon. Rhett, staring into the flames, his face etched with memories, answered simply, "My wife's. Mary died giving birth to our son. He didn't make it either." Ellie's heart ached. "I'm sorry," she murmured. He nodded, his gaze distant. "I buried them out near the West Ridge. Thought I'd stay here until the wind took the roof off." Words failed her. There was nothing to say, only the heavy silence that spoke volumes. Once again, the silence enveloped them, deep and knowing. She added another log to the fire, its crackle filling the quiet. He in turn poured her another cup of coffee, the steam rising like a gentle sigh. They sat close, shoulder to shoulder, their dog nestled between their shadows, flickering and dancing against the rustic walls in the warm glow of the fire. As dawn broke, chaos erupted. She was roused from slumber by the desperate cries of the cattle. Red was already halfway out the door, rifle in hand. Without a moment's hesitation, she followed. The sky was still a canvas of inky black, the stars obscured by a veil of smoke. Wolves had breached the fence, their presence marked by the heavy metallic scent of blood in the crisp morning air. Rhett discharged his rifle twice in quick succession. Ellie, her eyes narrowing with focus, raised her own weapon. One of the wolves, its eyes glinting with feral intent, turned towards her. With a steady breath, she fired. The shot rang true, and the wolf fell. Her chest heaved with exertion as she lowered her gun, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Wiping the sweat from her brow, she met Rhett's gaze. "Good shot," he acknowledged, his voice calm but his eyes conveying a silent respect. "I told you not to underestimate me," she retorted, her voice firm yet tinged with relief. "I never did," he replied, his expression serious yet his eyes soft with unspoken pride. By sunrise, the cattle had calmed. A calf had been lost, a small life snuffed out too soon its innocence, unaware of the harshness of its world. Ellie knelt beside its still form, her hand resting on its side, feeling the cold where there should have been warmth. Red approached his presence, a quiet strength, standing beside her, as the dawn painted the sky in hues of sorrow. "I used to think being small was a weakness," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence. "No," Rhett responded, his voice gentle. "It's just a size, nothing more." The shame that once burned in her cheeks had transformed now, a steady warmth in her chest. She wasn't a burden, not a disappointment, nor merely an afterthought in life's grand narrative. She was here, she was real, she mattered. As dusk fell, they returned to the porch, their bodies weary, but their spirits unbroken, the day's trials etched into their very essence. As the firelight danced once again across the windows, Ellie reclined in her chair, a cozy blanket covering her legs. Red, with a steady gaze, handed her a steaming mug of coffee before settling opposite her. "Are you planning on staying?" he inquired, his voice a mix of curiosity and hope. Ellie's eyes wandered to the horizon, where the first stars of the evening were beginning their celestial waltz. "That depends," she replied with a hint of mystery in her voice. "Are you still hiring?" His response was a slow, rare smile, one that warmed the room more than the fire itself. "Only if the job comes with opinions, back talk, and a better aim than mine," he teased. With a playful glint in her eye, Ellie responded, "Guess I qualify then." They sat in companionable silence, watching as the fire dwindled to embers and the sky transformed into shades of indigo, as if holding secrets of its own. The wind, a soft whisper through the tall grass, made the world feel both vast and intimately close. For the first time since she had arrived, Ellie felt like she wasn't just a character in someone else's tale. She was the author of her own. Suddenly, the storm announced its arrival with a hiss, as if the land itself was sending a warning through the rustling grass. The sky darkened, turning bruised and heavy, while the wind twisted into eerie circular gusts, sending the chickens into a frenzy and making the barn door moan. Ellie stood in the paddock, gripping the gate, her other hand shielding her eyes as the initial raindrops kissed the earth. Rhett's voice, urgent and clear, cut through the howling wind. "Get the feed inside. This one's coming fast." There was no room for debate. With a sense of urgency born of necessity, they moved. They hauled sacks of grain, secured flapping tarps, and guided the cows to shelter under the eaves. The dog's bark was abruptly silenced by a thunderclap sharp as a rifle shot. Rain descended in relentless sheets, drenching them within moments. By the time they reached the cabin, Ellie's hair clung to her face, her dress heavy with mud and water. Rhett, with a forceful shove, closed the door behind them, the storm's roar now muffled, but its presence still felt in every creak and groan of the old cabin. They bolted, their breaths, ragged bodies dripping as they stood in the shelter, listening to the wind outside wail like a wounded beast. Ellie wrung out her sleeves, her laughter sharp and breathless, cutting through the tension. "You call this a spring drizzle?" she exclaimed, her voice tinged with incredulity. Rhett shook his head, water dripping from his hat brim. "I call it a warning," he said, his tone heavy with foreboding. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a battlefield of broken branches and a fence in desperate need of repair. Yet the air had transformed, thick and charged with an electric tension. By midweek, the town itself seemed to thrum with this new energy. News came through the blacksmith, a whisper of change. George Penner was back. Ellie didn't react at first, her movement steady as she loaded supplies into the wagon. Rhett watched her in silence, his gaze intense. "You're not going to ask," she said, her voice calm yet carrying a hint of challenge. "I don't need to," he replied, his words settling between them like dry kindling, ready to ignite. She hadn't thought of George in weeks, hadn't even uttered his name. But now the past had come back wearing spurs and a smirk, with intentions clear as day. By Friday, Penner was holding court in the saloon, as if he hadn't once publicly shamed a woman. He was different now, sharper, leaner, more polished. Rumors swirled he'd come into money perhaps from land up north or dealings back east. But nostalgia wasn't his motive. He was back for property, specifically Rhett's. The confrontation arrived sooner than expected. Rhett had ridden into town for salt and kerosene with Ellie, insisting on accompanying him, her spirit a mix of defiance and curiosity. She wore her working clothes with pride, the dirt under her nails, a badge of honor, and a revolver at her hip. They saw Penner the moment they stepped through the mercantile door. "Well," he drawled, his voice slick with sarcasm, "if it isn't the little lady with the big mouth." Ellie didn't flinch. "Still trying out insults instead of apologies," she shot back. He turned to Rhett, his lips twitching in a smirk. "You're the one who took." "Oh, the audacity of some men thinking they can just waltz into your life, your sanctuary, and claim what's yours." George Penner, with his sly grin and overconfident stride, had the gall to approach Rhett once more. "I want your land, Callahan," he declared, his voice dripping with a false sense of entitlement. Rhett's jaw clenched, a subtle sign of his brewing storm. "I'm here for business," he retorted, his voice as cold as the steel in his eyes. "You can do that elsewhere." But Penner, with his predatory instincts, stepped closer, his shadow looming over Rhett. "Heard you're hurting." He taunted, his words like barbs meant to dig deep. "You heard wrong," Rhett shot back, his tone unyielding. Ellie, with a protective fire in her heart, moved before Rhett could react. Her presence was like a storm, gathering her steps, deliberate and fierce, until she was mere inches from George. "You think size is all that matters," she said, her voice a low, threatening whisper. "But you miss something. I've got grit in places you've never looked for it." Penner's laugh was a hollow echo in the tense room. "Is that supposed to scare me?" "No," Ellie responded, her revolver drawn in a swift, fluid motion, the click of the hammer echoing like a promise. Not aimed at him, just resting at her side, a silent testament to her resolve, her eyes unyielding as the mountains held his gaze. George, in a mocking surrender, raised his hands. "Touchy," he sneered. "You should leave." Rhett's voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. Penner backed off, his grin still intact, leaving behind a trail of unspoken threats. "You'll regret turning down my offer," he warned, his voice a whisper of menace. As the door closed behind him, the room exhaled, the tension dissipating like morning fog. Rhett turned to Ellie, his eyes softening. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," she said, holstering her weapon with a finality that resonated through the quiet house. "I did." That night, an unease settled over the ranch, as palpable as the mist that clung to the ground. Red, ever vigilant, double-checked the locks while Ellie, arm crossed, watched the horizon from the porch. "He's not finished," she murmured, her voice a mix of dread and determination. "No," Red agreed, his voice a low rumble. "He isn't." 3 days later, the night was shattered by the sound of hooves too many to be mere visitors. Gunfire cracked through the silence, a stark, violent contrast to the peaceful night. Ellie shot upright, her heart pounding in sync with the chaos outside. Grabbing her rifle, she met Red at the door, his face set in grim determination. They burst into the yard where flames danced menacingly at the barn's edge, and shadows moved men with masked faces, their rifles glinting in the moonlight. The scene erupted into chaos. Ellie, her senses sharp, aimed and squeezed the trigger. A piercing scream sliced through the night. Another shot from Red, and a second assailant crumpled. The air became thick with smoke, the pungent scent of gunpowder, and the frantic cries of frightened cattle. Ellie crouched behind a water trough, her heart drumming in her chest as she fired blindly into the darkness. Suddenly, an attacker loomed from her left, dangerously close. Her instincts kicked in. She swung the butt of her rifle, connecting with a sickening crunch against his jaw. He collapsed the ground, meeting him with a thud. Amidst the turmoil, Rhett's voice cut through, calling her name. She spun around to see him cornered by two menacing figures. Without a second thought, she fired the bullet, piercing one through the shoulder. His accomplice, realizing the peril, vanished into the shadows. Then, as if a storm had abruptly ended, the attackers melted away. The silence that followed was eerie, only disturbed by the faint crackling of fire and the pained groans of a wounded man near the gate. Ellie, her leg grazed and hands trembling, made her way to Red. "Are you all right?" she gasped. He gave a terse nod. "And you, Her voice strained yet defiant answered, "I'm fine." Together they tackled the smoldering remnants of their ordeal, extinguishing fires that threatened to consume more than just the barn. One cow lay lifeless, a grim casualty of the night. They secured the lone survivor of the ambush, a man whose face, once unmasked by Rhett, sparked a flicker of recognition. "Hired gun. Worked for Penner before," Rhett muttered as they locked him in the root cellar, awaiting the sheriff's arrival. As dawn broke, painting the horizon with hues of healing bruises, Rhett stood by the paddock, his arms crossed, lost in thought. Ellie approached her, silence speaking volumes. "Why didn't you tell me you'd been threatened?" She finally asked, her voice laced with hurt and confusion. "I didn't want you scared. You should have known better," he replied, his gaze meeting hers with an unspoken apology. "It was respect. I didn't think you'd stay." He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "You're not what I expected, Ellie Gray." Her smile was soft, a testament to the unexpected turns of fate. That night, after the sheriff had taken the prisoner and the last of the embers had died down, the air was still thick with the night's events, but a quiet resolve settled over the land. Once again, they found themselves by the fire, the silence this time a well-earned respite. Ellie broke the quiet, her voice a mix of reflection and revelation. "I used to believe love was a gentle whisper," she mused, her gaze lost in the flickering flames. "Letters, promises, polite exchanges. But now I see it's more than that. It's standing firm, fighting for someone who won't let you stumble." Rick, in his silent way, responded by taking her hand, a gesture that spoke volumes. Ellie did not resist. Instead, she welcomed the warmth of his touch. Outside, the livestock stirred their movements, a testament to life's persistence. The fire cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to chase away the ghost of George Penner into the night. But the tale was far from over. In the days that followed, the air was thick with heat and the relentless sound of hammers as they worked to repair what the fire had sought to destroy. Ellie's sleeves rolled up nails between her teeth, toiled from dawn until the stars claimed the sky. The scent of burnt wood still hung in the air, but intertwined with it was something more profound. Resilience, defiance, a silent pledge not to let destruction have the final say. With each swing of the hammer, Ellie wasn't just mending beams. She was rebuilding her identity, her resolve echoing in the rhythmic pounding. No longer was she known as the little bride. Her name was spoken with a new reverence, a careful respect. She was the girl who had stood her ground, who had fought back. While she didn't seek their approval, she felt its significance settle upon her. Rhett's gaze lingered on her more openly, not with doubt, but with an unspoken depth. Their days were filled with labor, their words few. But as evening fell, the atmosphere shifted. They sat by the fire, longer shoulders touching, neither pulling away, finding comfort in the silent companionship. One morning, a parcel appeared on the porch. Inside chalk-small slates and a collection of donated books, a sign that the world outside was still there, reaching out, offering new beginnings. The old general store held more than just goods. It was a silent harbinger of change. No note accompanied the red scroll wrapped around the package, yet its purpose was clear. Ellie had an inkling that it was more than just a gesture, it was an invitation, a door opening to new possibilities. And she walked through it. 2 weeks later, children from neighboring ranches started arriving every other morning, eager to learn, under the sprawling cottonwood tree near the paddock. There, Ellie had set up benches where she taught letters and arithmetic to kids whose hands were toughened by work, their eyes sharp with curiosity. She spoke with a firmness that commanded respect, peppered her lessons with praise, and wove tales between teachings that made the children laugh and gasp in wonder. Word of this sanctuary of learning spread like wildfire, but so did something more profound, a sense that this battered land was not just surviving, it was becoming a beacon, a cornerstone of hope. However, not all was serene. One evening, as the sky darkened with the approach of night, Rhett sat on the porch, his knife whispering against its stone as he sharpened it, while Ellie mended a tear in her dress beside him. The silence between them had evolved into a comforting presence filled with unspoken understanding. Yet tonight an uneasy feeling lingered in the air. He set the knife down, the quiet broken by his voice. "Penner's gone too quiet. Too quiet." Ellie nodded, her gaze sweeping over the ranch. "He's not one to back down after just one setback," she mused. "He'll be back, perhaps with deeds or something far more sinister." The fence was stronger now. The barn, though marked by the past, stood resilient. "We'll be ready," she declared with a steely resolve. Rhett turned to her, his eyes softening with a mix of admiration and concern. "I meant what I said that night. You've got more fire in you than most men I've known." Ellie's response was immediate and fierce. "And I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere." "This land," Rhett began, his voice trailing off, overwhelmed by the simplicity of their truth. "It's everything," Ellie finished, her voice imbued with the depth of their shared struggles. "Because we made it that." The next day, Penner did return, not with the threat of force, but with legal papers and a lawyer in tow. Standing at the property's edge, he seemed to still claim ownership of the very wind that stirred the dust at their feet. As the sun cast long shadows over the land, Rhett approached the fence, Ellie by his side. There stood the lawyer, a lean figure with eyes sharp as a hawk, who with a practiced flourish brandished the documents. "Mr. Penner is within his legal rights to claim this land," he announced, his voice slick as oil. "It seems your grazing area extends into territory that was never officially documented following your father's demise. The original homestead boundary wasn't properly recorded." Ellie's heart twisted in her chest. It was legal theft cloaked in the guise of paperwork. "We've toiled on this land for a decade," Rhett declared, his voice strained with tension. "Do you believe you can erase that with mere ink?" Stepping closer, Penner retorted, "I think I can finally claim what was rightfully mine. Perhaps next time, think twice before you steal my woman." Ellie, quick to defend, stepped in front of Rhett, her eyes blazing. "I was never yours, George. I came here seeking a future, and you sent me back like a broken piece of furniture." Penner's sneer was cold. You should have taken the ticket when you had the chance. And you should have learned not to underestimate those who have something worth fighting for, she shot back. He laughed dismissively. What this place, this heap of dirt and animals? No, she countered firmly. This life, this choice, these people. Behind her, children gathered near the fence, their eyes wide with curiosity. Word had spread through the town. Locals had come not with weapons, but with their presence with gifts as witnesses to this confrontation. The blacksmith stood arms folded, his stance resolute. The baker's wife cradled her infant, her gaze unwavering. Penner's confidence wavered for the first time. This won't stand, the lawyer mumbled, trying to regain control. The law is on our side. Ellie inhaled deeply, her resolve firm. So is the truth. This land was forged with sweat, with blood. You can't purchase that with a mere claim form. Just then the sheriff rode up, tipping his hat to Ellie. He surveyed the scene, his eyes taking in the gathered crowd, the palpable tension and the silent strength of the community. The crowd watched with bated breath as he approached the stranger. He didn't address Penner directly. Instead, his voice rang out clear and unwavering as he demanded the documents. His eyes scanned the papers with a critical gaze. Beside him, Penner's lawyer whispered something about legal boundaries and technical jurisdictions. The sheriff's frown deepened, his voice firm yet warm. This ain't a courthouse, but it is a community. Here we stand with those who face the wolves. He returned the papers with a decisive nod. You want this land, file it properly and let the courts decide. Until then, I are trespassing. Penner's jaw tightened, his frustration palpable. This isn't over. He spat out the words laced with defiance. Rhett's response was calm, almost serene. But you are, he stated, his voice echoing a finality that resonated through the silent crowd. They didn't cheer, they didn't need to. Their silence was a powerful verdict, a collective stand. Penner, defeated, turned and mounted his horse, the dust kicking up around him like the remnants of a storm. That night, Ellie sat by Red, the fire between them crackling like the sparks of their newfound bond. He passed her a tin mug of coffee, his hands lingering on hers, the warmth of his touch speaking volumes. You've changed everything, he murmured, his voice soft with wonder. Ellie's gaze met his, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. No, I just reminded you what was already worth saving. He nodded a slow acknowledgement. I never thought I'd love again. Or be loved. Leaning close, the scent of cedar from his shirt enveloped her. I see you, Ellie, all of you, and I love every part. Her smile was radiant, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Good, because I'm done measuring myself by anyone else's expectations. Their kiss was not rushed, but filled with the certainty of those who had earned this moment through trials, through choice, through fire. In the distance, coyotes howled a wild chorus to their newfound peace. As morning light painted the sky in soft gold, Ellie stood at the edge of their land, watching the children arrive for their lessons, their laughter a sweet melody across the field. Rhett joined her, his hand finding hers in a silent promise. She spoke, her voice steady. I came here as a castaway. Now I feel like a cornerstone. His grip tightened, a silent affirmation of her words, of their shared journey. Her hand tenderly cradled the future. You were never broken, she murmured, just waiting to be truly seen. Under the ancient cottonwood tree where Ellie once walked as a stranger, now stood rows of children, their laughter intertwining with the rustling leaves. This tree, once a silent witness to her uncertainty, now whispered tales of belonging. From her pocket, she retrieved the letter George had penned, now a mere relic of the past. With a flick of her wrist, it met its fiery fate, transforming into wisps of ash. Home isn't measured in inches, she whispered, a revelation that seemed to resonate even with the wind. Rhett, standing beside her, nodded in silent agreement. Together they faced the sunlit path ahead, their spirits entwined, ready to embrace whatever destiny held. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery and transformation. Your support means the world to us. Please share your thoughts, like, share, and subscribe to stay with us as we continue to explore the heart's true home.